Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher. In this video, I want to talk about why counting rhythms is not an effective way to learn to audiate rhythm. And so I promise you this title of this video is not clickbait. Um, Basically, the problem that people get into is that because we can describe rhythmic phenomenon using numbers and math and all of that kind of stuff, people try to use counting and numbers and conceptual understanding as a way of getting themselves or their students, if they're teachers, to actually play with good rhythm. And there's a giant flaw with that mental model or that pattern. Now, I'm not an extremist in any sense. So I do think that once someone can audiate rhythm effectively, then it's appropriate to teach them how to count or how to label those rhythms or how to visualize those rhythms in a way that is more conceptual. There's nothing wrong with that. I am a big fan of learning music theory and learning how to read rhythmic notation and having a deeper conceptual understanding about how rhythmic phenomenon could be represented using like a graph or a grid or anything like that. So that I'm not against any of that. But what I do notice is that the cart is put before the horse, and we try to use counting as a way to get students to develop good rhythm. And so, why is that a problem? Why does that not actually work? And it might be difficult for you to notice if you are a music teacher yourself. It might be difficult for you to acknowledge the problem that's actually going on, because it's likely that if you're a music teacher, you probably have good rhythm and you can count the rhythm and it's no issue. But you might notice that when you teach beginners, counting doesn't really help things that much in terms of their ability to execute rhythms. And I'll give you a really good example of this. I remember when I was in high school, we had a jazz band, and there's this kid that joined the jazz band one year, and he was a monster drummer. He was a drummer and he was playing the drums. He could not read drum notation. He could not count anything, but the guy could play anything. I mean, basically what would happen is the band teacher would show him the beat that he wanted to play, and the kid could just hear it and pick it up and play it. And so what's going on there? That kid had insane rhythmic audiation and ability to put that rhythmic audiation on a drum kit, but he did not have the conceptual understanding about how to count that rhythm. He did not have the conceptual understanding or just the skill of being able to read that on a staff. And so this is where a lot of issues come from music education and a lot of tribalism. There's the group that says you should only do pure kind of do it by ear and that's what matters. And then there's the group that really just tries to teach the theory too early in the process. There's nothing wrong with teaching theory and how to read music notation and all that, but they just put the cart before the horse. They're trying to get the counting to do something that it can't do. And so how do you actually teach rhythmic audiation? And that's what I want to get into here. So earlier on some of my earlier videos on what audiation is, I think it's the first video on my channel, I recommended a book by Edwin E. Gordon called Learning Sequences in Music. If you're a music teacher and you haven't read this book, oh my God, some things are going to change in your mind. If you're a dedicated musician, you should seriously read this book. I think it's kind of crazy how many people don't know about this. It completely transformed the way I think about music, and it will explain a lot of things that you probably have already intuitively noticed yourself. But I want to talk about what Edwin Gordon says on the chapter about chapter 7, the rhythm learning sequence. And so he does kind of acknowledge there isn't a perfect way to satisfy describing what rhythm is. I mean, some people aren't going to like it described in certain ways, and the Western mind has a tendency to think about rhythm as being like a very mathematical and temporal thing, and not everyone's going to like that, and that's fine. But what we can talk about, what the fundamentals of rhythmic audiation are. We have rhythmic meter, right? And so what a meter is when we audiate microbeats and macrobeats. And so what does that mean? So in the case of 3/4, for example, and this is a wonderful example to use. In the case of 3/4, what's actually going on is we're hearing something like this. Da, 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 da. So the big beat is actually on 1. So we could go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's where the big weight is felt. And we're going to get back to that concept of weight and balance because that's actually insanely important for developing rhythm. The micro beats are these smaller beats. Da, 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 da. So if we're using a very kind of mathematical kind of temporal version of this, the macro beat occurs much less often, and the micro beats are kind of nestled within the macro beat. And this is fun when I work with students who are in high school band class. When they read 3/4 on a piece of music notation, the way they learned to read that was like 3 quarter notes, right? And they tap their foot on the quarter note. They're going bang, 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 bang. And I actually discourage students from doing that. You want to feel the macro beat on the 1. So it should be da, 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 da. And it doesn't seem like this would be a big shift in thinking, but it's the difference in audiating 3/4 in terms of it actually being triple meter. And what I think a lot of beginning students are doing, they're not truly audiating that it's in triple. They're kind of hearing each quarter note as a macro beat. It just doesn't work. And my experience with students is once you retrain them to hear 3/4 properly, they kind of sit in band class and notice like, wow, something very wrong is going on here. And so what a lot of teachers try to do is they try to, with an example like that, they say, okay, count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and put an accent on the 1. Now, the problem with just teaching someone to put an accent, like if I teach someone to go, they may or may not be actually audiating the triple meter there. You can't just have someone put an accent on something and assume that they're actually audiating the meter. And so what is actually going on when someone's audiating the meter? I mean, when I'm audiating 3/4, it's like ba da da ba da da ba. So, it's online in my mind, but how do I make sure it's online in a student's mind? And this is where a lot of people get super uncomfortable with teaching rhythm because the counting and the conceptual stuff, just quite frankly, does not work in the beginning. It's fine to add on later, but rhythm is actually felt as it's processed through the part of your brain that controls your balance, your vestibular system. And so this is why people that do dance class or some kind of dance, they usually have a way better rhythm than people that have tried to learn music conceptually. And so I remember years ago, I had a student who, she was learning how to play piano. She's a wonderful musician. I had her at the very start of piano lessons, and I was explaining these rhythmic concepts to her, not mathematically, but that you need to feel the weight of the beat. That's actually what's going on here. And she's like, oh yeah, I totally know. Like I've been dancing for I think at that year she had been in like 10 years of dance classes. And I could see the difference that it made because when I started to teach her how to read rhythmic notation and how to even count, which again, there's nothing wrong with learning the conceptual stuff. She was learning to do that on top of this really intuitive understanding of how to feel the weight of a beat. And that's what's actually going on is when we have macro beats. So say we're in duple and it's like ba, 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 ba. My voice is doing micro beats. Do, 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 do. But my body is feeling the weight of the macro beats. Now I'm a terrible dancer. Absolutely atrocious. You do not want to take dance lessons from me, but I can feel the weight of the meter and the rhythm enough to be a good musician. And that's really what happens here. And so this is where a lot of private music educators get super uncomfortable because let's say someone's coming to me for guitar lessons, and they're like 12 or 13, and I'm trying to help them develop rhythm. We can't really do this by just sitting down and counting. It just doesn't work. It's not an effective way to do this because the brain actually needs to learn to feel weight and space and flow. Edwin Gordon talks more about this in detail. You should check his stuff out. But this concept of feeling weight is really important. And you can't feel weight by just making one of the notes louder. You need to feel weight by actually moving your body. And so again, this makes people super uncomfortable, but it is insanely more effective at teaching people to feel rhythm. And so you actually see this with metronome use. So if we have a metronome, what can happen is when we put a metronome on to try to give someone good rhythm, the metronome is just making a sound. That is not audiation yet. What makes it audiation is when we give that sound musical meaning. And what gives musical meaning to pitches and rhythms is actually putting them in a metric context. So when we put it in a metric context, we are the core of audiating rhythm is actually feeling the rhythm as a kinesthetic thing. So there's like this weird subconscious kinesthetic grid going on. So when I'm playing a tune and it's like, I can count that as, whatever you want to count it as in duple or 1, 2, 3, 4. But what I'm actually counting is I'm not counting pitches. I'm not counting individual notes. I'm counting the way this kinesthetic grid, this vestibular grid, this balance grid actually feels to do. And you can see this when people play nothing. So if I do this, I could count that as 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm counting the actual notes. But what if I just play nothing? Play nothing in the sense that I'm not actually playing what I'm counting. Or I could just go. What I'm actually counting there, what I'm actually engaged in, is this kind of kinesthetic visualization. And that's really what visualization, not in the sense I'm picturing something with my mind's eye. I'm picturing something with this kind of part of my brain that can visualize kinesthetic things, that can visualize weight and movement. And this is something you notice with really good musicians who have a sense of like micro rhythm, who can actually stretch the beat and compress the beat a bit. They really feel where the macro beats are. And so if we go back to Gordon for a sec, the three components, this is just right out of the chapter. The three components that define rhythm are macro beats, micro beats, and rhythmic patterns. So what he means by that is that to audiate rhythm effectively, you're audiating the macro beats, you're audiating the micro beats, and that's what gives you a sense of meter. And then you're audiating whatever the rhythmic pattern is. So if I'm audiating, let's say, triple, da, 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 da. So I'm just kind of improvising there. But what's going on is the macro beats and micro beats are being constantly kind of kept in my body as a rhythmic grid, and then I can audiate individual rhythmic patterns that play off of that. And that's how rhythmic is actually being processed at a cognitive level. And so again, just to re-emphasize this point, once you go through the process of learning to feel the microbeats and macrobeats in your body, then you can actually label them with something like, Gordon would call it a verbal associate. And so you could go do-day, do-day, do, or in triple, you could go do-daddy, do-daddy, do-daddy. You could give it a label, but you could also just straight up count it. There's nothing wrong with counting. There's nothing wrong with numbers. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, in my view, it doesn't really matter what we use to label it. What's more important is just at the beginning, the proper skill of being able to feel the weight and the flow and the space of the rhythm is installed. And you have to do that by moving your body. And this is why a lot of people, I'll give an example. One of my best friends is an amazing piano player. He's an amazing singer. And what he did as a kid, he went to this music school in town that is well known for pumping out excellent piano players. They have a dialed in piano curriculum, but they are geniuses. What they do before you're allowed to take private lessons with a teacher one-on-one and you're really young, you have to do a basic musicianship program. And what is the basic musicianship program? It's a bunch of kids singing songs and dancing. And unfortunately, in music kind of academia and pedagogy, those kinds of early childhood classes where people are just literally like dancing and singing songs, they're treated as less musically valid than, sitting down with a teacher one-on-one and learning the math of how rhythm is counted and all that, which is fine. That stuff's all good too. But the actual singing and the dancing gets treated as something that's not very serious, and that's just kind of fun for kids to do, right? But it's actually insanely effective because the way you develop tonal audiation is by singing. That is a more efficient way to do it than basically any other way. And the way you develop rhythmic audiation is by actually moving your body. And it just turns out that a lot of these general music education classes in like preschool and in the younger primary grades at school, that is what they focus on, and they rightly focus on that stuff. They don't get into music theory. They don't get into all this kind of advanced conceptual stuff that is wonderful to know when the time is right. And so that's just a very basic kind of preview into what rhythmic audiation is, and specifically why counting is not an effective way to train someone's rhythmic audiation. So if you have any questions or comments, shoot them down below. Happy to talk about this stuff. It's super interesting. My name is Beau. I offer what do I offer? Online guitar lessons and piano lessons. I also offer coaching for music teachers who are trying to learn to teach better. Especially if you're getting into Edwin Gordon's music learning theory, there can be a high kind of barrier to entry, and there's many wonderful programs you can take to up your skills in terms of teaching with music learning theory. What I kind of specialize in is doing it on a one-on-one level, especially with guitar students. So if you want to learn how to teach using music learning theory dedicated towards guitar students or drum students, actually, that is something that I've kind of worked on a lot over the past few years, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm always happy to meet with teachers and talk about how we can up your skills as a teacher, help you design a curriculum, and just be more effective as a teacher. So thanks so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day.